Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Satsang. Let's make some silence first. Forget about everything else. Nothing, no one exists. No good, no bad, no better, no worst. Emptiness. Okay. So let's talk today about illusion. So what is illusion? Sometimes when it is said that everything is an illusion, seekers get confused by this illusion. What does it mean? And there's a lot of explanations about it. I've given a few also, comparing the notion of reality with that of the notion of a dream. They're much the same, but it goes even beyond this. A person looks around, looks at the world, sees the world moving, evolving, whatever that means, changing. Better word, changing. And it seems that things have a destiny of its own. And they try to see which are the parts that are an illusion. What is that which is an illusion? And it is said that everything is an illusion. And this, for some, it's easy, at least intellectually, to entertain. For others, this concept is too much. But what is this illusion? What you look around at the world, for those who are not involved with spirituality, it doesn't exist because there's only spirituality. So everyone's involved. Everybody is playing the game. If you're experiencing this, whatever it means, then you're in the power of delusion. What is delusion? Well, in some when I say it's not something innocent, it means that it has a life of its own. It is a power, that which sustains, upholds, sustains all these apparent manifestations, the body, the circumstances where the body is, everything is the same, of the same nature. And this is superimposed on you. It is a power, it is something that is much alive, and it's not innocent. And this power has an identity, a consciousness, and in some cultures it is termed as Maya or Mother. It has a presence, a life, something that can be even interact with. And the point of all of this, that is too much, the point of all of this. But okay. So everything which is experience, what you call your life experiences, it's like the mother which is preparing the child for the point where it moves on its own. Moves where? Well, psychologically speaking, usually is moving towards the father. And in this case, it is moving towards consciousness. So all these experiences, they are preparation. And the mother tests the child, gives them toys, and as he loses interest in those toys, he tries to grow and to become independent. The mother will test that independence. if it is really mature. And when it is, then mother gives the blessing for the child to go. So delusion, uh, worldly manifestations, any manifestation, it is the power of this this delusion, of this consciousness. And it is testing everyone, preparing everybody for the same purpose. There's nothing else. Nothing else. Or you have a very limited vision of the world, or it is easy to see that there's nothing else. But I'm not going into detail about this now. The glue that holds this together, whatever that means, is the importance that you are giving to all of this. And there are, well, we can divide it in many parts, but eventually the biggest force that, which one is the biggest is relative, but let's speak it like this. Happiness is the biggest binding power to this, per se, and happiness with its unfoldings. And what happiness? Happiness, which is the happiness that is envisioned by those who are in the dream, and that is circumstantial happiness. The drive to establish the perfect circumstances, or the perfect for your vision, for happiness. And there are different levels of happiness, depending from where you're standing. That which is a little better than where you are, it is happiness. That which is a little not as worst as you were, it is happiness. So from complete happiness to a little bit better than what you are, this is the binding force. Even suffering. Suffering is something that, it's an experience that puts you more away from happiness. Because you can get used to suffering, a lot of people do. But this suffering is connected to happiness, to that circumstantial happiness. But let's say that happiness and suffering, the two opposites that keep you entertained. But there are some servants of these two primary forces, which is only one, but okay. But there are forces that protect these two, that make things more difficult. And that is the fear of suffering and hope. Hope and happiness, they are the most powerful forces to bind you in delusion. And the fear of suffering, and suffering itself, it's only a problem because of the ideas of happiness and the hope for that happiness will come. So fear and hope, these two intense forces, because suffering in itself, when you're there, it is bad, it is. But the fear of suffering, it makes you act in different ways and do a lot of things, because when you're actually experiencing suffering, there may be some struggle in the beginning, but when you start getting used to that, that struggle goes away. But before you get in touch to suffering, the fear of suffering, it's the force that makes you try to run, to change things, to do this and to do that. Your whole life, if you observe it, is fear-based. Mm. The decisions are fear-based. It is always about not going through fears because of the hope of being happy. Mm. So decisions are based on these fears. And fears without hope, it would be useless also. So eventually, uh, hope is even much more important than fear in itself. But it cannot be addressed in the beginning because uh, it is a driving force that takes the more dense aspects that are clinging into your consciousness. This hope helps you to remove these grosser ones. Then hope becomes an obstacle also. So for the majority of seekers, those who are dealing already at another level, which I'll talk about that after, uh, hope becomes one of the big issues because that hope also keeps you focused. Not focused, not really the word, but the mind becomes one pointed, and that is not good at that level. It has to be silent, still, not one pointed. But in the beginning, it is important. So, for the majority of seekers, fear and suffering is very important because to transcend it, you have to cut the importance, the power that they have over you. So you're practicing meditation and you're trying to grow spiritually and keeping an ordinary life. It is a little bit naive because you have to understand for success in that undertaking, you have to understand the laws, the rules of the game. And daily life, like the life of the body, the importance you give to it is that which maintains more or less your story going. And it's like you're forced into a script that it is writing itself, and you're moving with it like it was your own story. And the moment you try to change direction a little bit, fears arise. Fears arise to put you back into your place, put you back on that story, on that track. So when you're trying to meditate and to intensify your practices, make no mistake, this is preparing you to deal with these forces, to go up against these forces, not to go in favor with them, to go against them. So in a way, if you're serious and you're intensifying it, it will not make things, oh, so nice, beautiful, later. That is much, much, much later. Before it is, you're going closer and closer to your own hell. And the hell is facing those powers that hold you hostage into this continuous, non-stopping experience. And as you intensify your practices, fear starts coming in your way. The more you grow, the bigger the fears are. The more potential you have, even if you've not grown, the more potential you have, the stronger the fears will come at you to make you stop, to make you go back to the normality. And this is, like I said, illusion is much alive. And if you're behaving, if you're doing what you're told, what you're expected, things go normally. And normally, it is what you deem as normal. But if you try to come out of it, then you will see that normality, your own vision of normality, changing drastically. The laws, the logic that was applying before changes and starts to opposing you intensely. And if you've not faced your fears, if you're not being under suffering, if you're still afraid of the experience of suffering, you will not hold your ground. So for those who are in a hurry, and I've been speaking about guidance and guidance a lot, and it is a big part because that is the it's not even just guidance, but more sacredness. That is the ingredient that will help, that will make things happen. But for this sacredness to increase, guidance has to be there. And for guidance to be there, so that there is a point of guidance being there, several aspects have to be there. I will be concentrating today on this fear, because guidance will push you through your own world, through your own fears. And if you haven't dealt with some of them, at least, if you've not gained some kind of freedom towards these fears, towards the experience of suffering, then there's no point of guidance being there, because what is the point of directing if you're not going to be able to go through? No point. And for all of you, when you come to these deeper fears, your experience, your sensation is that you're not going to be able to go through, that you will eventually die, explode, whatever drastic thing will happen, you will not be able to stand so much pain and suffering. This will be the experience. But if you're being directed towards that direction, it means that it is possible. But again, if there's no faith, no sacredness and faith, you will not be able to go through, because you will believe these inner screams: I'm not capable of, I'm not worthy of, or I'm not, all these I'm not, and you will succumb to that. And this is why this first work is very important. And there is a science in dealing with fears. And without going through some of the fears, you cannot test this science, you cannot see it. So its power, the power it has over you, is enormous. But if you test these fears, you will be able to see by yourself the logic of it, the mechanics of how it works, and it becomes more simple for you to transcend them. And when you transcend a small fear, for example, your inner strength increases. So the fear that was next to that one, that seemed to have this size, when you overcome the previous one, this reduces. You have grown, so this fear becomes smaller. A fear, when an intense experience of fear comes, and I will take this intense because it is more easy to see. As it arises, you are impelled into some sort of action. or to stop some sort of action also. It's not just there just to terrify you. When it is just terrifying you, you want to run away. So that is an action. So fear is there to put you back in the box. Hmm? Spiritually speaking, in this context, uh, because everybody is a slave to fear. So these people cannot be at peace just with their human lives because they are hostages of fear, and they have to run here, run there, do this and that because of fear. Fear has the whip, and it is whipping them, and they cannot stop. They cannot be at peace with their human life without any further aspiration. So fear has the power that you give to it. When it comes, when it arises intensely, you are propelled desperately into action to stop it, to change circumstances so that that you won't be exposed to the fear or to the suffering that comes afterwards. And you have to run here, run there, do this, do that, or stop what you're doing, don't do it anymore, whatever. It comes to command, it comes to bind you. And sometimes you're not experiencing fear, circumstances are nice, for example, and you're doing your practice and whatever. But as you get more prepared to be in front of a fear, things will start changing. Hmm? Circumstances will change to bring this intensity to you and to see what sort of work you have been doing. What is the maturity of your work? And of course, I don't need to say, but I will say it again, this is for seekers of truth. Seekers of well-being cannot go through this because at this first experience, as this fear is coming, they will stop because that's not what they've signed for. It is for pleasure, it is for improvement of reality delusion, uh, not for fear, not for suffering. And suffering means it's not flowing, so not flowing, not right, stop. So they don't go through this. So if you're intensifying your practice, these fears will have to come. It is natural. It is a part, or else there's nothing happening. There's no life in the process. But as life is coming, or as life is gaining the space in your life to come, fears have to be dealt with. And what fear is telling you not to do, that is exactly what you will do. For example, to increase the level of fear. And this is anti-natural. And this means that nature, delusion, doesn't want you to go through that way. And all of you have seen all these, if you do this, then boo will happen. And eventually, if you go through that, it can be even be bad, but it's not as bad as fears were saying. And sometimes you suffer a lot of time because of fears, and the experience of that fear was just small. Okay, it was bad, but then it stops. You spend more time suffering because of fear of suffering than from the suffering itself. So eventually, if fear says you don't go to your right, that's where you will go. And as you are going, and fear is intensifying, suffering is coming, everything is screaming inside, stop, don't do this, come around, stop it. You persist, you continue, and then your experience will be that the suffering in itself, when you stop resisting it, it is not that impressive. Things will not be as close as what you were imagining. And if you happen to be able to stand your ground completely, it will lose complete power over you. It will lose it. It will dissolve. And if it is an intense one, that dissolution will bring an experience of inner expansion, big expansion, a flow of joy, touching the flow of life. That is what fear is separating you from, that flow of life. Not life, human life, but life, the source of life. And as you move from one fear to the other, one fear to the other, you will see the same mechanics. As you cut the importance and you persist and you let yourself be there in the presence of fear without changing circumstances that are bringing this fear, you will understand that it works always the same way. As you persist, fear disappears. And as you maintain yourself in a presence of suffering, experiencing suffering without fighting it, without trying to escape from it, you will see that as bad as it may be, it's not that bad. It's not that of a boo. And this means you're regaining your strength, your lost strength. It was there all along. You just didn't believe it because you believed the fears. You believed all these forces that were impelling you. So for the majority, fear is the force that binds everybody, compelling to life. The fear of rejection or superficial ones. The fear of rejection, the fear of suffering, and it goes to the most intense one, that is the fear of death. So from one extreme to the other, a lot of fears are in the middle, but it is always the same mechanics. It has only the power that you are giving it, with the importance that you are giving it. And for you to prepare yourself for sacredness to increase, faith has to be there. And for that, you have to go to your fears. So if you're preparing for guidance, to be able to be ready to be guided by the divine, to be brought back to the source, you will have to go through your fears. And if you're in a hurry, if you're doing your spiritual practices, fears will come, situations will come, but it takes time. If you understand the logic, then you can do this process by yourself more fast, more intense. So instead of just looking at the bright star of hope for happiness, you might want to turn your attention to your own fears to see your fears and do whatever is necessary to overcome them. This is preparation. And as you go through these grossest fears, this will allow you, for example, to intensify your practice. So first you have gone through these external fears, the fears that are connected to external circumstances. And this, you will have to go through them. But like I said, it takes time because meditation is preparing you and all of this, and you don't understand what is happening. So you have to wait. But if you're in a hurry and you have heard of these mechanics, you can test them and you can accelerate a lot the time that is involved in all these things by not being there just waiting for life to bring you that experience, for you to go through it. You can go and bring this experience to you. It is possible. And as you do this, things become more intense. And then, as you go through these outer fears, then you can intensify more your spiritual practice, your meditation. And as it is increasing more and more, you will have to deal more with these forces where they really are, which is in this intimate space of perception, and not in the outside, in circumstances. But it is difficult to work on this inner aspect from the start. Just for establishing a spiritual practice, you will go through challenges from the outside. People around you, with depending on the type of attachments they have on you, they will offer resistance to this. It is normal, natural, expected. But then, innerly, as you remain more and more intensifying your meditation, your attachments will start to come, your fears will start to arise, and the fear of losing that which is dear because you're not investing in them. And if you don't invest, you will lose most of it. Well, by one side, if it is really there, if it is really, really important, it will continue there. By the other aspect, you have nothing. So what can you lose, really? So just two different visions that will help you to continue this work. And then the more and more you sit in meditation and become more still, gaining more stillness, those attachments, those fears will arise and impel you like they've always done, but you wouldn't be seeing them there at this intimate space. And this is where you continue compromise with stillness and not acting according to these impulses. And it goes from the most external aspects, external fears, the most superficial fears, to the fears from the core. And those things that you can see already, and others that it will take time for you to see, or those that you saw them in one way and they are not in that way, those superficial fears, it goes on to the most deeper ones that are more closer to the core of the character. And those are the ones that you don't dare to touch. Those fears that you give a lot of excuses, and not everybody, because majority of people, they are completely entertained with these outer fears. But those who are already working, already went through some fears, there are those fears that cannot be questioned. And there's a lot of things, a lot of things. People say a lot of things, and spiritual seekers, they tend to use wisdom as a means to justify inaction. But eventually, these are the pillars of your delusion. These are the pillars of your suffering. You can justify them, and for the majority of people, that makes sense, but they will continue to be the source of your delusion. Because as long as you succumb to them, don't dare to touch them, you will not be able to transcend these fears, to be free from these fears. And everything becomes conditioned to this. Fears, and then hope. Hope has to be put aside also. Because even the quest for truth, so that I don't experience fear, so that I don't experience suffering, it's not enough. It will have to mature, because this motivation is that which is feeding, maintaining, giving importance to delusion. So you have to dig also these motivations, dig deep to find them. They are there, and take them out. Take them out, not involving with them, not involving with them. So it is a process where you start dealing, if you're in a hurry, if you're a seeker of truth, you will start dealing with your smaller fears, those that you can embrace. And by going through them, you will see there's a mechanics in them. They work in a particular way. As you hold your grounds, they lose the power they have over you. And then the more you can see this, and becomes a living experience for you, it will be much more easier to grab bigger and bigger fears and bigger fears and bigger fears, until there's nothing there to disturb you, to force you into investing, into action, into go to this or that. Then you will have silence. Then you will be able to sit in that silence. And in that silence, hope is disturbance. Not before. Before, it is a good driving force, more or less. It's a better evil. Then, when you have gone through the majority of fears, that you're having silence, you're not being forced into action, into doing whatever, then hope also becomes disturbance, because it's something that pulls you. One pushes, the other pulls. Then it is time to abandon this hope. And of course, during this process is inevitable. You have to go through these images of circumstantial happiness. So happiness and the images of happiness, they don't have so much of a strength directly. But hope is something that needs to put aside. They say that hope is the last thing to die. How do you say it? Yeah, it's more or less like this, the sentence. And without hope, majority of people, they don't continue to live. There's no point without hope. So this is the part of the journey which is more difficult, and only the seeker of truth can go through. Because if you don't have images of happiness and hope. If your happiness, the concepts of your happiness is circumstantial, you cannot continue. You will wither and die. But if you're already in this level of silence, then hope can be disconnected and your boat will continue without restlessness, but it will continue. And there's this idea that the fear of death is not the biggest one. And it's not an idea, but it is a practical experience that people have. Because sometimes suffering seems so intense that the person says, I rather die. I will die and get over with it. So in the concrete experience, the fear of suffering seems worse than death itself. But in practical terms, it's not really the case. It's not really the case. Because if you're exposed to the situation of death, not as a flash event, then that becomes the most important thing. And survival, comparing to the experience of death, to the idea of dying, survival is happiness also. It's not, but it is better than dying. But eventually, for those who are mature, they will see that this fear of death is very strong and also will have to be overcome. But that is, for that, sacredness has to be intense, faith has to be strong, and for them to be like this, and this guidance has to be present for a long time already, and for this to be the case, this first part of dealing with all these fears and being in the presence of suffering, being exposed to suffering, this is very important. You see, in your life, you have seen, for example, that you have made big journeys, a lot of things just to go around the fear, just so that you won't be exposed in the future to that situation. So a lot of miles have been done just because of these things. And this is why the spiritual path, the path towards freedom, apparently seems to take a long time. Because you're not realizing that your fears, they are your map to freedom. Going through them, not moving around them. When you understand this, things become more fast, more intense. If there's any questions about this, you can send now or later when you're seeing this video. I will answer your question now. Dear Sriman, traveling through the levels of consciousness, I noticed how the thoughts differ based on it. Yes, of course. Probably it's good to stay with those higher levels. But it is true, if not there. But is that true if not there anymore? Hmm. Probably good to stay with those of higher levels. But it is that true if not there anymore? Probably not to stay with any thoughts is the best. That is what you need to try. But could you speak about this true or not true, please? It is not about being true or not true. You see, your level of recognition now, that is your truth. And the logic that makes sense now, that is your truth. But if you go to a higher level, that becomes your new truth. But sometimes you pierce through this higher level, but you cannot sustain it because that's not really your truth. You're just seeing something that will open your horizons. And that will make possible for you to drop that which is lowest. So, and as you get into contact with these higher levels, that which is at a lower level, it's like becomes the perception of it becomes more gross, more heavy. It's like something that was waving. Maybe yes. Okay, the weight, waving more or less 50 kilos becomes 250 as you moved towards this more subtle, um, more higher frequency. Then you are pushed back, is not a choice, you are pushed back to this, to your reality. And as you are able to remove this, for example, these gross things, fears, for example, they are keeping you at this level of consciousness. And as you move and you touch a higher one, this intensifies to pull you back. So you'll have to go through it so that you can really move up. And that up becomes your truth, not the truth, but your truth. And the more you let go of these fears, attachments, and all of this, the more you can go up and up. So you're trying, you're meditating, and living at this level in your truth now. That work will open up a space where you can go through and you can experience this higher level. But then you will go back to your own truth. And then you have to make what you know. You have to stand to what you know already, to that higher level. And as you stand for that in the face of what is the present truth, then you can move up. So it's not the majority of the times you will try not to be with any thoughts. But this staying at a higher level, it is a choice, but it's not a choice. It is a choice because you can face your fears, you can drop your attachments, you can. But will you? But without doing this, you have no choice of staying there or coming back. You'll come back. Most won't even touch these higher spheres, only with a lot of work. Because if they did, they wouldn't be able to survive it. Because the loss of their world would be too violent, too violent. So this truth, your vision of truth is from where you stand. As you move to higher grounds, whatever that means, that will become your truth. until the nothing or the all. And thoughts, yes, they differ into different levels of consciousness, differ in intensity, in quantity, in the type of thoughts also. Um, they differ a lot. A lot could be said about this, but you have more questions, ask, because every question, it's tied to a lot of aspects, a lot of different aspects. So it is, you see, there's even another way of putting it. If you move to a higher level of consciousness, to remain there, you have to be detached from that which was in your previous level of consciousness, especially your suffering, and from everything. From, if you put the images of happiness, the hope for happiness, and the attachment for suffering, if you put the three, the attachment for suffering will be the most difficult one to drop. And this is the point. For those who are doing therapies and all of that, which is interesting, nice, but uh, can be a nuisance in the quest for truth. But okay, but it offers opportunities also, because you can observe the other and see yourself in the other. So it is, everything offers an opportunity if you have the eyes for it. But you can see this, for those who are doing this, you will be able to see that the person which is coming for help, for treatment, whatever, the when it is in pain, it continues and it does whatever is being said for it to do. As it starts improving, these efforts of change starts to diminish until it stops. And for those who have seen and have pushed, because it can be made also, push these people more towards this condition, to this intensifying this work of stopping suffering, they will see that when these circumstances of suffering starts to disappear, they start to become restless, anxious, and eventually, as they stop their treatments, if you okay, this Instagram stopped, so I will put it back again. So if you stop this, if you stop these things and the person is getting better, then she stopped the treatments, whatever, then if you happen to find this person sometime after this, you will see that the majority of times that person is more or less in the same situation, or sometimes even worse. Because, and it's worse in these cases, more or less in the same, when this is only about just a therapy as a worldly treatment. But if it is connected to spirituality, and the more intense it is, the more close the person gets to something which is true, which is going to move her from her world, you will find her worse than she was previously, because of the attachments of pain, of suffering, to her own suffering. Because the most difficult thing to let go is the attachment for your own suffering. Exactly how you experience it, that type of suffering. You may think that you are doing everything to let go of suffering so that you won't experience it, and no. But in reality, isn't it strange why your decisions always tend to lead you to the same experience? It changes circumstances, but the experience is there because your decisions are based on this attachment for your own suffering. And if you don't transcend this, you cannot remain. You can touch, you can see by blessing, by grace, also by merit, by your own work. You can see it. You can experience for a while, but you cannot remain there. So eventually you'll have to go through all these fears and transcend them so that you can really establish yourself into these higher vibrations, higher states of consciousness. And as things lose importance and silence becomes abundant also, then these ideas of higher levels becomes also a disturbance, and just remaining in silence, in stillness, that will be the jewel of all of it, the gold of your quest, of your spiritual practice. And at this level, then, if a formal practice should be there or if it should stop, then guidance directs, because it has been directing all along. Okay. Let's see if there's anything else. If there's not, then we'll end for today. Nothing else here. You can send your questions whenever you feel like. You don't need to wait for the time of satsang to do that. If you're watching this, it doesn't matter when, you can just send the questions here and I will answer in the next satsang whenever it will be possible. You don't have to wait a lot because not many questions, but you don't have to wait for this moment to ask your questions. Okay, next satsang will be Tuesday, same time. So keep up the practice, keep up the work, make it real for you. Okay, till next time. Let's